Good evening and welcome. Today we're going to have the history of Permanente Quarry by Ted Atlee. But before we start the presentation, I'm going to ask you to please turn off your video and your microphone. And we are going to record this presentation for later. So if you have a question during this time, just use chat for asking questions. And at the end of the presentation, I'll read the questions and Ted will answer them. Next slide, please. The first, a commercial message. So the mission of the Saratoga Historical Foundation is to preserve the rich history of Saratoga for the education and enjoyment of the community. So we have a wonderful museum in a 1904 building with information about Saratoga's history. In addition to a permanent exhibit on Saratoga history, we also have special exhibits. Today we have Parmesan, as well as the Parmesan champagne cellars, which I'm sure you'd enjoy seeing. We have a fully furnished 1850s pioneer cottage. You can come inside a one-room schoolhouse and take your photo or sit in the interurban passage stop. Or for more events, you can go up to www.saratogahistory.com. Join us again. We have the Blossom Festival. It's on May 17th. It's be held at the Heritage Orchard and Civic Center, and we hope you'll come, and it's free. This lecture series is being recorded and will be posted on www.saratogahistory.com. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ted. He's a native of San Jose and fourth generation Californian. He's retired from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department. Concurrent to his full-time career, he worked for 36 years in game day operation at San Francisco 49er games. This led him to write Candlestick Park, an illustrated history of the stadium. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Ted.
Ted, go ahead and share your
Thank you. All right. Are we looking good on the slides?
Excellent.
Yep.
Everybody can see the slide? Good. All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. I have to give a caveat first. This is the first time I've ever done a Zoom presentation. I've done lots of speaking in front of groups, so it's a little different, but let me try to get into the groove here. So let's jump right into the Permanente Quarry, and I'm sure most people know where that is. It's at the end of Stevens Creek Boulevard. It's what's now Cupertino. And we're going to kind of look at its history here, especially the Kaiser years, and then what that led to. All right, so we actually kind of start here. This is an odd way to start a quarry in California, but this is Ford Island, late in the afternoon, or in the afternoon on December 7th, 1941. We're looking at these either sailors or Marines in this machine gun nest that they built, and they built it there. You can see, hopefully you can see it, it's Permanente cement bags. And so this talk's going to talk, well, how did these end up with the cement from the hills of, we'll call it Cupertino or West Santa Clara Valley on that date. And so really to start this, we go way, way back, 150 million years ago, when single-cell organisms known as foraminifera fell to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and then were compacted, and the calcium carbonate solidified into limestone. And then about 105 to 88 million years ago, these limestone deposits formed on the Farallon Plate. I know that map's a little hard to understand. I looked at it many times to get it, but anyway, it's kind of out there in the middle. The paleoaltitude, or the latitude of a place at a time and point of time, was about 22 degrees north. So just kind of keep that in mind for a minute. And then 88 to 65 million years ago, this limestone rode the Farallon Plate as it started moving northeast, where it subducted under the North American Plate. And as it did so, the limestone was scraped off and it remained atop the North American Plate. About 30 million years ago, the San Andreas Fault began to form. A compressive uplift and a little bit of a bend in the fault formed the Santa Cruz Mountains. And as the limestone deposit was uplifted, it formed what they called the Permanente terrain, which is a chain of limestone deposits that run parallel to the fault from Pacifica to San Juan Bautista. The largest of those deposits gave its name, and number 13 there in the middle is where Permanente is. So you can see it follows the fault and it follows the kind of the ridge of the mountains. That's kind of it on a topographic map. If you're not familiar with these, I won't give you a whole lesson in them, but the closer the brown lines, the steeper the terrain, or the steeper the mountains or valley. So here's the Montebello Ridge. That's kind of Cupertino, Monte Vista right over there in the upper right corner. Where the yellow pin is where the quarry is at about 1,800 feet of elevation. And I sort of added sort of a last minute thing where the grapes are over there on Black Mountain is where the Ridge Winery is. And according to their website, they too take advantage of the limestone soil, which they find unique in California to grow their grapes. They find it adds sweetness to the grapes. And as any of you who are wine buffs know, the Ridge has won international competitions with their Cabernet grown in those vineyards. So we have many beneficiaries of this limestone that took 100 million years to get here. If you go back to a map of Rancho San Antonio, the Mexican land grant, they have drawn on that map, or they did draw on that map, Arroyo Permanente from its headwaters on the north slope of Black Mountain, and it runs down the mountain to the east and then turns and goes north to the bay. And it was named because it flows all year, which is, as most of us know, it's kind of unusual in California that you have a creek that doesn't dry up in the summer times. So we'll jump up here to just around 1900. That land out there was in agriculture, in vineyards and other agriculture. And then in 1902, the Granite Rock Company, which had just started in Watsonville, and we're certainly familiar with them. They're still around. They're one of the largest construction companies in the world. But in 1902, they bought this quarry and they used the limestone, or they sold the limestone to a sugar refinery, a beet sugar refinery company in Alvarado, which is now Union City. And so they took it by horse-drawn wagon all the way from Permanente up to Union City. And then this article here, which is in a mining put out by the State Mining Bureau, talks about the El Dorado Sugar Company quarry, which I guess that was its name for a while, and how they haul the limestone to Mountain View, where they put on the rail line. That the railroad tracks they speak of there are the same as what Caltrain runs on now, the San Francisco-San Jose Railroad, and then trucked it to Alviso, where there was another sugar beet refinery. In February 1931, a group of builders met at the Engineers Club in San Francisco and to discuss their interest in bidding on the contract to build Boulder Dam on the Colorado River on the border between Arizona and Nevada. So these are the companies. They formed a consortium called Six Companies Incorporated. They operated in different states using the name Six Companies. They offered lots of other companies, but it was this core six companies. And if you count there's seven companies because Kaiser and Bechtel, who had been partners for a long time, were considered one company. And they took the name Six Companies from the six companies of Chinatown, who were the group of people that really ran Chinatown in San Francisco in the 19th century. So this is a little bit of an homage to them. You can see these companies built a number of things that we still use, like Hetch Hetchy, the Mark Hopkins Hotel, and other things. So none of them were big enough to build on that project. It was a huge project to build that dam. And so that's why they put this consortium together. So they won the bid. There were five. It was about $49 million, which I forgot to figure out what that is in today's dollars. They were $5 million lower than the next lowest bid, and they were awarded the contract. And that's Henry Kaiser in the middle there, who's signing for the rest of the men in the six companies. And Henry's job was in charge of the aggregates. He was also the representative who went to Washington when they had issues with the government. And he also built and was responsible for Boulder City, which where they housed thousands of men, housed, fed, transported, everything men to the work site. So each company had something that they contributed into this thing. So there's a couple pictures, lots of pictures online of building Hoover Dam. I'm sure a number of people listening have probably visited it. When you get bored with gambling in Las Vegas, you go over and take the tour of Hoover Dam. Um, the names change back and forth between Boulder Dam, which was the canyon nearby. It's actually built in Black Canyon. Boulder Canyon is just upriver, which was the first place they were going to put the dam, and so the name stuck. Went back and forth. The project started under President Hoover. It was completed under President Roosevelt. And in 1947, Congress designated as Hoover Dam permanently. Here's the people from 6 companies. They're standing in front of the diversion tunnels. So that dam, so they had to divert the river through tunnels on either side of the canyon while they built the dam, and then plugged off the tunnels and allowed the water to fill up into the behind the dam. So 6 companies, while they're building that dam, get involved in other projects. One of them is the Broadway lower level tunnel, which we now call the Caldecott Tunnel between Contra Costa County and Oakland. They built that. They had some issues there on the geology of it, the rocks structures that they ran into problems, but they built that project. Thomas Caldecott was the head of the Highway District, and that's how it got it. Highway District 13 was formed to build that tunnel, and that's what it was named for, later named for. They also built parts of the Colorado River Aqueduct. The Colorado River Aqueduct comes from Lake Havasu on the Colorado River, across through Riverside County mostly, and into the Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego, bringing water. It was built in the 1930s. JF Shea and Utah Company, which were 2 6 companies, had other portions. This portion that's pictured there, that siphon, that's Kaiser and Morrison Knudsen and W.A. Bechtel building that. Parker Dam, which is 155 miles downstream of Hoover Dam, was also built at the same time by the Bureau of Reclamation, and it formed Lake Havasu, and they draw water out of Lake Havasu into the Colorado River Aqueduct. So the dam was built by the federal government. The aqueduct was built by the Metropolitan Water District. But these companies had a hand in that. There were other companies involved also. They put these 2 different consortiums together that are listed down below there to build the piers for the Bay Bridge. So the piers are everything from the floor of the bay up above the water line to where the steel starts. So they build the piers, then the steel companies build the towers or the bridge, the steel part of the bridge. So Bridge Builders Incorporated, to the left there, which was Kaiser and Bechtel and Utah and Warren Brothers, and these 3 other companies that they brought in who had experience building bridges, especially in the Midwest, where they built a lot of cantilever type of bridges over rivers to build the eastern span. The western span went to Transbay Construction Company, which is a consortium of 4 others of the 6 companies. Pacific Bridge there, while they were building the Bay Bridge, was also building the piers for the Golden Gate Bridge. So they were pretty adept at working in that deep water, building cofferdams and sinking them down in and pumping them out, and then putting the concrete in. Then 6 companies. This is actually, so Columbia Construction Company is 4 of the 6 companies, including Kaiser and Bechtel. They got a bid. They won the bid to build a good portion of Bonneville Dam on the Columbia River, a little bit upriver from Portland. They're working on that. And then Consolidated Builders, which is really the same 4 companies as Columbia, but they had different percentages. They weren't all equal partners. So they built parts of Grand Coulee Dam, which is farther upriver on the Columbia in eastern Washington. So the 4th big dam that the federal government built in the 30s and into the 40s was Shasta Dam on the Sacramento River above Redding. They did not win that bid. They didn't lose it by much, but they didn't get that bid. It went to a different consortium. But separately, Kaiser and his partners in different percentages bid on the cement and also bid on the sand and gravel. So concrete is made up of cement, which is the binder, sand, gravel, and water. So when they won this bid, the Permanente Cement Corporation, which they formed, which is primarily Kaiser, but other partners are in there too. They took over. They actually beat out a consortium of 5 cement companies in California, which controlled the cement supply and controlled the price. So he underbid them, and he took on this consortium and beat them, and got this bid to provide 5.5 million barrels of low heat Portland cement for Shasta Dam. Only problem, and so Columbia Construction Company, one of those other entities, got the contract for the aggregate and for the sand. So Kaiser, who had started as a road builder in the early part of the 20th century in Spokane, and then in Washington, the rest of Washington and British Columbia, and then sort of worked his way south building roads, built roads in Northern California, and he had a gravel pit near Redding. It's 9 miles from where they're building the dam. And when Southern Pacific Railroad wanted an excessive amount to move the gravel over to the dam, from the quarry to the dam site, one of Kaiser's engineers said, well, let's just build a conveyor belt. So that they did. They built a 9-mile conveyor belt. Was the longest conveyor belt in the world. It took special engineering by Goodyear on the belt. It crosses the Sacramento River twice. It crossed the state highway. It crossed other roadways. And it also had that road, that fire road next to it, and a wooden walkway. And they did that in 6 months in a very wet winter. So that's how they got the sand and gravel to the dam. So because of the sand and gravel, now I need cement. So he wins a contract. Kaiser has this contract to provide cement. He has no quarry for limestone. He has no cement plant, nor has he ever made cement. He's used a lot of cement. He's never made cement. So he sends a couple of his engineers back east. They learn how to make cement. And even before he had the contract for the Shasta Dam supply, he was already working on this quarry out in Cupertino. And so you can see there's kind of a bit of a timeline there. He gets permission from the county to build a cement plant. And then in June of 1939, they begin construction on the quarry and the cement plant, working 24 hours a day. Then he bought the land, which he had previously been leasing, for $235 an acre. And to get the cement from here up to Redding, required Southern Pacific Railroad, and they built a connection to the rail. I should have mentioned way back in the, let me stop here for just a second. So back in the very early part of the 20th century, Southern Pacific built a cutoff from Mayfield. So Mayfield is that California Avenue part of what's now Palo Alto. It was his own town. And they had the railroad there that ran between San Francisco and San Jose. And they built a line that started there. It came out around kind of paralleling Page Mill Road, we'll say, and then down through what's now Los Altos and across Stevens Creek. And then another line came out from Campbell through the Vasona Junction out through Los Gatos and Saratoga. And that was one big loop that they had. It was both for the railroad and for the interurban for passengers. So in 1939, to serve the quarry, before they were bringing the material from the quarry down to where the railroad crosses Stevens Creek in Monte Vista, and just down from there, they built a 1.9 mile spur from Simila Junction, which is the Homestead and Foothill, what's now Homestead and Foothill, into the quarry. So, like I said, they have the railroad there, the connections in. In June, they begin construction on the quarry, and 6 months later, they're producing their first bag of cement. And then added another kiln and increased production up to 12,000 barrels a day. Here's kind of a map of where we're at. I mean, there's Palo Alto and Mountain View and Los Altos and Cupertino's over here, Monte Vista, I'm sorry, here's Saratoga and Cupertino. So where the red arrow is where the quarry is. The blue arrow is where the cement plant is. And the yellow arrow there is the Simula, the Y and the railroad, which is now, like I said, the intersection of Homestead and Foothill Expressway. There's a closer look. So they started 1,800 feet of elevation. That's where the limestone was. And they have electric shovels, which scoop up the limestone and other rock um, with electric shovels. They put it into buggies. They dump it on this conveyor belt, which is 4 miles of gravity flow conveyor belt, because the quarry and the cement plant are about a mile apart and about 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet different in elevation. So the quarry's high, the cement plant is low, and so they bring the rock and all down on conveyor belts. And as the conveyor belts are slowed, to keep them from speeding up due to gravity, they take the power off that and use it to power those shovels. So just like regenerative braking works on electric vehicles now, they were doing the same thing in 1939, 1940, and taking the energy produced by the braking and using it to power those shovels. The cost of the plant was $10 million. $7 million of that was put up by the Bank of America, and the rest from Kaiser and his other partners and 6 companies who were part of that. There's no test on this, but that's how how cement is made, from pouring the rock and moving it, screening it, washing it, crushing it, and moving it down, and then into the kilns where it's heated up to 3,000 degrees, and then mixed with water and other things and clay, and eventually it comes out and it's either put into silos to store or bagged. Those rotating kilns were among the largest moving machines in the world at the time. And to power those, they were using 16 million cubic feet of natural gas every day, which was pumped in from the San Ardo fields down in southern Monterey County, and also from San Joaquin County, where their oil wells were. They brought the gas up here to operate the cement plant. So he needed 7,000 barrels a day for Shasta. They're really making 12,000. So he signs a contract with the Navy in February 1940 for 500,000 barrels of cement to the Navy and another 500,000 barrels to the Ready Mix Concrete Company of Honolulu, which of course is a Kaiser entity. He also guaranteed to the Navy that he could ship that in bulk into the tropics and it wouldn't harden up. So 1941, the U.S. was preparing for war. It was not a surprise that there was a war, just where and when it began was the surprise part of it. But their new war was probably inevitable. And so they formed contractor-specific naval air bases with like another consortium of construction companies, some of them from 6 companies. Kaiser is not a direct partner in those. Bechtel was, Utah, and Morrison Knudsen. But Kaiser got the contract for the cement. And over the course of, so CPNAB worked from 1940 to December 41 on Wake Island and Midway and a lot of things in Hawaii and Guam and Johnston Island and Palmyra and the Philippines. And then obviously a lot of that work stopped when the Japanese attacked most of those places in and around December 7th. That was around the time that the Navy organized the Seabees and put them to work. So they had military people doing construction work after that although the CPNAB did continue in some backwater areas where they weren't going to be attacked. But they were building these projects. These are the projects that were all working on these before the Japanese attacked. So major portions of Pearl Harbor, other bases in Hawaii. There's a huge underground fuel storage on on Oahu that Morrison Knudsen was building. I believe they still use that, the Navy. Housing projects, and all you can see all that list there. I won't read it to you. That also the same funding built the Naval Air Station Alameda. CPNAB had a shipping facility there, and they also leased Pier 31A in the Honolulu Harbor. These were quite, and I could do a whole thing on just CPNAB, which I won't, but it was quite a thing to hire men, get them out to these very remote islands. There were some of them, like Wake, didn't even have water. They had to collect rain. This really was their only water source. So we won't go too much into that, but just remember that the cement that they used from 1940 to 1945 came from Permanente. So we kind of get back to here. So when Pearl Harbor was attacked, Kaiser already had 65,000 barrels of cement in silos in Honolulu. So they're able to quickly start making repairs on runways and dry docks and whatnot. We talked about way back in that 100 million years ago when the little organisms formed into limestone on the Farallon Plate. That was at about 22 degrees north, and Ford Island is right at 21 degrees north. So using a little bit of poetic license, that same limestone that moved 100 million years ago ended up in the hills of Cupertino, got quarried, got processed, and ended up back where it began. The latitude is known, the longitude, the scientists can't really determine that exactly. So that's a bit of poetic license there. So if you look at these men and their bags of concrete that they're using, or cement, excuse me, to protect themselves, and then think that the concrete that they are sitting on, which is the seaplane base at Ford Island, was also cement that came from Permanente. So like I said, so the repairs were being made. The Utah Construction Company got a contract with the Navy to fix dry docks and runways and other facilities in Pearl Harbor and around. The Pacific Bridge Company, that same company that was building the piers for the towers on the Golden Gate Bridge, worked for 2 years with the Navy to salvage the battleships. So they built cofferdams around the battleships so they could pump out water, make patches, and Pacific Bridge and the Navy was instrumental in Pacific Bridge, I should say, was instrumental helping the Navy in patching and refloating the California, the West Virginia, and the Nevada. All three of those ships were repaired enough to get them to Bremerton shipyard, naval shipyard, and all returned to the war. This one here they're working on was the Oklahoma, which rolled over. They, in 1943, attached these 21 towers and cables and righted it and fixed it. And it was being towed back to Bremerton when it sank while being towed. But that was Pacific Bridge that helped do that. Excuse me a second. So the Joshua Hendy Iron Works, Joshua Hendy came here in 1849 from the UK. It had a lumber mill up in Mendocino County. There's a state park up there named after him. And then he went into the gold rush and he started manufacturing equipment for the gold rush, mainly for hydraulic mining. He had a factory in San Francisco, which was lost in 1906. The people in Sunnyvale offered him free land. So he moved his plant down to Sunnyvale. Yes, they moved the plant to Sunnyvale. I don't know if he was still alive. The plant moved to Sunnyvale. And they made equipment for mining. They've also made hydraulic equipment that was used in building the Panama Canal. They made some of the gates that are used in the Panama Canal. During World War I, they built some marine engines for cargo ships. And Depression, they continued to make different things, gates and valves on those dam projects like Hoover they built. They built the huge doors on Hangar 1 at Moffett Field. Um, and in 1940, they were in financial troubles. The Bank of California owned them. So Charles Moore, who was a machine tool salesman, enlisted the assistance of people from the six companies, and they bought the company, led by Felix Kahn, who's one of the six company people. And the six companies owned 65% of Hendy, and the other 45 belonged to Moore. When Admiral Vickery of the Maritime Commission was concerned that he didn't really have anywhere to make steam engines on the West Coast, it was mentioned to him by Kaiser that he should call Charles Moore. And so they gave a contract to Hendy to build the reciprocating steam engines for Liberty ships. They were very low technology. As a matter of fact, the engine room on the Jeremiah O'Brien, the one in San Francisco, is such old technology that they used it for the engine room in the movie Titanic. That same triple expansion steam engines. The reason they did that is they're quick to build. They needed a lot of ships. So that's what they did. To build turbine engines like are in the ad there takes a lot of machining and a lot of know-how by your workers, and they just weren't ready in 1940 to do that. But Hendy did build 754 engines for Liberty ships, which was 28% of the total used, and then went on to make the gears and turbine engines for the Victory ships and other ships. At the end of the war, Hendy was purchased by Westinghouse and became Westinghouse Marine. They built propulsion equipment for submarines, nuclear submarines. They built launch tubes for ballistic missiles. And in 1996, they were purchased by Northrop Grumman. They are still in the same place. If you're on Caltrain and riding just as you pull into Sunnyvale on the right, there's the Northrop Grumman, same place that Joshua Hendy's been since 1906. Still back up to Permanente, as German planes were being shot down in the Battle of Britain, and they were reverse engineering them. They realized the Germans used a lot of magnesium, and magnesium production in the U.S. was very limited to one plant by Dow Chemical. So the government went into a program of making more magnesium or increasing production of magnesium. Henry J. Kaiser never wanted to miss a trick, got a contract and started building a magnesium production plant at Permanente. He signed a contract with a Austrian physicist by the name of Dr. Fritz Hangerg. That's him there on the pointing there and on the left picture. He had a carbothermic process there's different ways to make magnesium. He had what was called a carbothermic process that required heating the ore up to 3,800 degrees and then cooling it in 1,000th of a second to 380 degrees. In order to rapidly cool that, they used natural gas in the process to cool it, and then took the natural gas and piped it on over to the cement kilns and burned it to make cement. Unfortunately, they were started production but weren't fully complete. And 10 days after Pearl Harbor, the FBI came in and arrested Dr. Hansgerg because he was an Austrian national, and we were now at war with Germany, who then controlled Austria. Austria was part of Germany at the time. So he was arrested as an enemy alien, and he was booked into the Santa Clara County Jail. But Sheriff William Emig allowed him to use his office and telephone to keep in contact with Permanente while they continued to build the plant. But then the government moved him back east. They did allow him eventually to go back to teaching at a college in Virginia, or back there somewhere. Anyway, that was him. These are the large retorts that they're taking. The magnesium is a very volatile. They had a number of flash fires. A number of men were killed in fires during this production. In this shot here on the left, you can see a big hammerhead crane that's using to lift those pieces of equipment out of the retorts. The picture on the right there is that one of those three cranes. That picture, the crane on the left is one of those three cranes building Grand Coulee. So Kaiser brought one of those cranes down from Eastern Washington and had it out in Cupertino. There was never a great demand for magnesium. The U.S. aircraft were mostly aluminum, continued to be aluminum. So they decided they took some of that magnesium they were making and made it into incendiary bomb material called goop. It was mixed with asphalt and was dropped on some of the fire bombings in Japan, including one on Tokyo. Not the major one on Tokyo, but a later fire bombing of Tokyo. And they ended up producing 9% of the total incendiary materials used by the U.S. were produced out there at Cupertino. The magnesium plant did get the Army Navy E for Excellence award. Only 5% of all the armaments companies won that award. So they were one of those that did win that. I should have gone back. So did Hendy. That was why it was in the Hendy slide. So going back to that excess cement that he's now selling to the Navy, and he needs to get it from California to Hawaii and to the other islands. Back in 1940, Henry Kaiser purchased two freighters, which had been used in the construction of the Panama Canal, had them converted to bulk carriers by Todd Shipyard in Seattle. They were renamed the SS Permanente and the SS Felipa, and operated by Matson Navigation. Matter of fact, on December 7th, the SS Permanente was tied up at Pier 31A in Honolulu, just aft of the USS Vega, which was a Navy cargo ship that had 130 tons of explosives on it. Some Japanese planes came towards them. The Vega fired on them, but they did drop some bombs. One of them was about 30 yards off of the Permanente. It didn't do any damage to the ship, but they were in the war quite early on. They continued to use those ships through the war. So that sort of got Henry Kaiser into the idea of shipbuilding. And so when the British in 1940 were looking to build 60 cargo ships in the United States because they couldn't make them in their own country as they had no materials, or at least not for that, because of the U-boats, Kaiser and Todd went together and they bid on them. And in November 1940, Henry Kaiser stood on mud flats in Richmond and told the Brits, hey, this is going to be a shipyard. And sure enough, they gave him the award for 30 of them. 30 of them were also built with their partners in Bath, Maine. But December 1940, they got a contract to build those ships, the ocean class ships. And they started the yard number 1. And they had those 30 ships built within about a year. They were launched. They added eventually 4 yards in Richmond. It says Ford Motor Company, their assembly plant. That building is still there. So Ford was building cars there, and then they switched over to Jeeps. And then they also did work on tracked vehicles going to the Pacific. I point that out because that building is still there. It's now the Craneway Pavilion and a part of the national monument there to Rosie the Riveter. So the shipyard sort of surrounded them. They also built 3 more shipyards up in the Columbia River, 2 in Portland, 1 in Vancouver. They used a lot of modular construction. They had a lot of room to lay things out and build the ships. Kaiser got it down to where a Liberty ship was being built in 21 days, which was compared to 2 months by other yards. After one of their yards in Portland built a Liberty ship in 10 days, the Richmond yard built one in 4 days. So on November 8th, 1942, hull number 440 was laid down on way number 6 at the Richmond Yard 2. 4 days, 15 hours, and 26 minutes later, the SS Robert E. Perry, was launched, and the Maritime Commission accepted it on Sunday, the 15th. So 7 days and 14 hours from laying the keel to acceptance to delivery. It wasn't a show ship. It wasn't just done for the heck of it. 15 days after the keel was laid, it was loaded and it sailed for Guadalcanal. It then did Atlantic convoy duty and was off the beach of off of Omaha Beach on D-Day, among thousands of ships there. Kaiser had an idea for building these small carriers. You can kind of see the bow section there. They were sort of built onto a cargo ship hull. Could carry 36 planes. They had 514-foot deck, so it's a few hundred feet shorter than a fleet carrier those days. Said he could build 30 in 6 months, and the Navy said no. And through a friend and a chance meeting, they got FDR to say yes. And so in the Vancouver yard, Vancouver, Washington, they built 50 Casablanca carriers in 16 months at a cost of $5.5 million each. 2 of them ended up in the Battle of Samar, which is part of the Battle of Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. The USS Gambier Bay and the USS St. Lo were lost during that battle. Admiral Kincaid said they played an unbelievable part in defeating the Japanese. The St. Lo was originally laid down as the USS Chapin Bay. Then the name was changed to USS Midway, and it was launched as Midway. In October of 1944, the Navy renamed it to the St. Lo. St. Lo was a town in Normandy, so it was just a few months after the Battle of Normandy and D-Day took place there. They wanted the Midway name for a fleet carrier. That fleet carrier is still a museum ship down in San Diego. The St. Lo was the first Navy ship to be sunk by a kamikaze attack. In addition to the 7 yards on the West Coast, the Maritime Commission, there was a yard in Providence, Rhode Island that was being operated by the Ream Corporation. Yes, the hot water heater people. They were not doing a very good job. And so they got Kaiser and Walsh Construction, one of his other partners he'd used in the past, to operate that shipyard in Providence. They built attack cargo ships. This particular one, USS Serona, KA-43, it's kind of personal to me. My father served on that ship from January of 1945 to December of when it was launched through December of 45. He was on that ship. So here's a list of all the ships in the yards that Kaiser had. Some of the yards operated under the Permanente Metals Corporation, some under Kaiser Company, some under Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation. They're all different number. The partnerships percentages change, but they're all essentially under Henry J. Kaiser's control. So 1,490 ships were built on the West Coast Kaiser yards. And here's others. So other the the 6 companies also had shipyards. The California Shipbuilding Company in Long Beach, which was major, pretty much under the Bechtel, built a number of ships. Marin Ships in Sausalito was also a Bechtel yard that built mainly tankers. If you know where the houseboats are in Sausalito, that's where Marin Ships was. Pacific Bridge had a small yard. They had a yard in Evansville, Indiana, and then I said the Walsh Kaiser. So if you took all the 6 companies put together, they built 2,388 ships. Back in 1921, Henry Kaiser and Warren Bechtel started Industrial Indemnity Exchange, which was workers' comp insurance. When they were working on the Colorado River Aqueduct for the Metropolitan Water District, they enlisted this Dr. Sidney Garfield. He just graduated from medical school to set up a small hospital in Desert Center in Riverside County, and that he did. And with the nurse Runyon there, they had his hospital for the workers, $1.50 per month per worker for workers' comp. When they moved to the Grand Coulee project, Kaiser convinced Dr. Garfield to come up there, and they took this old hospital and did the same thing. excuse me, there they also allowed the families and the federal workers to be part of it. Um, so for 50 cents a week for wives and 25 cents per child, you could get medical care. A little bit less than most of us are paying now. But they did handle 15,000 people during the construction of Grand Coulee. When they moved on into the Richmond shipyards, a lot of their workers were not in very good health. It was the end of the Depression. Um, a lot of poor people were moving in to work in these yards. They had health issues, so they convinced Dr. Garfield. They actually got him out of his Army commitment to open the Richmond Field Hospital. And then in 1943, Henry Kaiser bought the old Fabiola Hospital in downtown Oakland at Broadway and MacArthur. With a loan from Bank of America, they fixed it up, and it became the first Kaiser Permanente hospital. After the war ended and the shipyards closed down, they opened that up to the public, and that's the true beginning of the Kaiser Permanente Health Plan. That was rolled into a foundation, a non-profitable trust, and it obviously continues to this day. It's the largest healthcare provider in the country, private, not including the government. So Kaiser always kept his headquarters in Oakland. People tried to convince him that San Francisco had more prestige. They built the Kaiser Center there, the curving building on the left in 1960. And that building is currently undergoing work to become the head of where PG&E is headquartered. The building on the right, the A.B. Ordway building. A.B. Ordway was Kaiser's first employee back in the road building days, and then he kind of worked at the insurance end of things. And so that's the Ordway building there. And Kaiser Permanente Health has been headquartered there since the building opened. In 1947, Kaiser purchased a German foil mill that was taken in war reparations by the U.S. government. They brought it to Cupertino. They fixed it up and set it up and started making aluminum foil there. Originally, it was for electronics and refrigeration and food packaging equipment. And then eventually into making aluminum foil, the household product, which didn't really exist much before World War II. If you have your grandmother probably called it tinfoil at times. I think people just were not. Tinfoil had been a product, but not like aluminum foil. And I think they just thought that some thin, pliable metal was tin when actually it's aluminum. But that was the first foil rolling mill west of the Mississippi. Their annual capacity out there was 18 million pounds a year and was about 30% of the nation's output, and they had 175 people working out there. In order to promote Kaiser aluminum foil, somebody may remember Kaiser quilted aluminum foil was a later version. At first, Kaiser sponsored the Kaiser Aluminum Hour, which was an anthology television show in 1956 on NBC. Future Academy Award winning directors like Franklin J. Schaffner, who directed Patton, and George Roy Hill, who won the Academy Award for The Sting, and Butch Cassidy worked on that show. And they had writers including Gene Roddenberry and Rod Serling, and actors Paul Newman and Natalie Wood, William Shatner, Eli Wallach, all appeared in that series, although that was only lasted a year. Then in 1957, Leonard Goldstein, who was the president of ABC Television, approached Kaiser, said, "Hey, we've got this new Western that we're working on. It's got this really likable young actor by the name of James Garner. We think people are going to like him. Would you be interested in sponsoring it?" And they did. So they sponsored the TV show Maverick. And when those ratings started falling off, there were some issues with Garner pulled out after a while, or was working halftime or something. And then they started sponsoring Hawaiian Eye, which is, if any of you remember, that was a private eye series. Their office is in a hotel in Honolulu. Henry J. Kaiser owned that hotel. It's the Hawaiian Village. Now it's the Hilton Hawaiian Village. But in order to promote his aluminum foil and his hotel and Jeeps and everything, He sponsored Hawaiian Eye. It starred Robert Conrad and Troy Donahue and Connie Stevens. It was one of 4 TV series that Warner Brothers produced of these private detectives in exotic locations. So 77 Sunset Strip was in Hollywood. Bourbon Street Beat was in New Orleans. Surfside 6 in Miami Beach, and Hawaiian Eye in Honolulu were all kind of a similar format. It was the first TV series to be set in Hawaii, but really they never left the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank. We're getting done here. I hope we haven't lost anybody yet. In 1957, at the hotel in Honolulu, they decided to add this convention center theater. So this aluminum geodesic dome was manufactured at Permanente, taken over to Hawaii, bolted together. They put a mast up and they raised this in just 20 hours. And it was a 50-foot dome and could seat more than 2,000 people. In order to introduce it, Kaiser sponsored the Hawaii premiere of Around the World in 80 Days. He invited Michael Todd and his somewhat glamorous wife, Elizabeth Taylor, to be there and formed a partnership with Michael Todd, who was a movie producer. Sylvester Weaver was a former NBC executive, also the father of Sigourney Weaver. Frank Lloyd Wright, Henry Kaiser. They were going to make these domes and put them all over the place in order to show the new widescreen movies that were coming out. Now, Michael Todd had been original in Cinerama, which used 3 projectors, and then he moved into Todd AO, which was a 70 millimeter projection system. Unfortunately, Mr. Todd died in an airplane crash a few weeks after they formed this company, and that was sort of the end of the Dome Enterprises. This is an articulated bus built in where else? Permanente, out of aluminum with a Caterpillar diesel engine. It's articulated, air conditioned, had lavatories on board, had more legroom than most buses. They only made one. Supposedly Santa Fe Lines was going to buy 60. They ended up with one, but they did use it for a number of years between San Francisco and Los Angeles. That's in the Santa Fe Trailways. That company later changed name to Continental Trailways. They added a rock plant out at Permanente in 1957 for roadways. Painted their trucks pink. Some of you may remember the pink cement trucks with the slogan "Find a Need and Fill It" on the side. Kaiser liked pink, as his second wife really liked the color pink. They continued to use ships. That ship there is a later, not the 2 I talked about before, but the later version, which they used to transport cement to the Pacific. And then in 1986, Kaiser Cement and Gypsum Company was sold out to Hanson's. The foil plant and cement plant were still in operation when Henry died in 1967. His son took over the company. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Eventually, Kaiser Aluminum Chemical was reorganized as a subsidiary of Kaiser Tech Limited and then sold to the Maxim Group. Kaiser Aluminum still exists. It has nothing to do with the Kaiser family. It's based in Franklin, Tennessee. In 1963, when the county wanted that rail line that ran up through Los Altos for an expressway, Southern Pacific rerouted the railroad directly on the Vasona line into the quarry. They took out the connection at Simila, and the right-of-way became Foothill Expressway. So when you're on Foothill Expressway, if you wonder why it's so straight, because it used to be a railroad right-of-way. This is what it looks like now. That pit in the center there is about 1,000 yards across and 600 feet deep. They no longer manufacture cement there. Hanson has agreed with Santa Clara County. They only quarry some roadway rock. They have currently in discussions with Santa Clara County on a 30-year mitigation plan to try to return that to its natural state. We'll see how that goes. Unfortunately, there is nothing in their plan about saving any of the history of the area. just real quickly here, Kaiser built lots and lots of homes in Southern California with Fritz Burns. He had one housing development here in San Jose. It's just north of what's now Valley Fair, between Winchester and then running east over to um, Bascom or actually Washington. Um, it was Kaiser Family Homes. Again, personal to me, the first home that I lived in, although I don't have any recollection of it, was in this housing development. Never man to miss a synergy. There's Henry on the right. GI Taxi was not a mistake. It was intentional. This is the housing development in West San Jose. Um, the roadway was probably Kaiser. The cement in the concrete on the curb and sidewalk is him. The houses have Kaiser gypsum wallboard. They used GI Taxi because these houses were $11,000 and you could buy a GI Bill with $60 a month. So I believe my dad was one of those GI Bill people who paid $60 a month for a house. And oh yeah, the car is a Kaiser Fraser. We won't get into that. It wasn't. It's another story. Anyway, um, Henry Kaiser, even though he obviously was overweight and a workaholic, did live to age 85. He died on August 24th, 1967. He'd founded over more than 100 companies at 180 major plants in 32 states and 40 foreign countries, over 300 products and services. Um, he didn't really have much of a succession plan, though. He lived the end of his life in Hawaii, did a big housing development over there called Hawaiian Kai. And that was his last project. But most of the Kaiser entities no longer exist, except the health plan, which was under a foundation. So that's the end of the story of the Quarry and Henry J. Kaiser and the six companies. Did I lose you?
What a fabulous presentation.
Would you like me to stop sharing here? Annette, would you want me to stop sharing?
Well, you can leave it. I mean, it doesn't
Okay.
matter.
I'll leave it up.
But really impressive, all the number of photographs and information you've been able to provide with this presentation. I'm just stunned.
Thank you.
I do see a couple questions that are here. One is, what do you think of the latest talk of bringing shipbuilding back to the Bay Area?
Well, I thought there was a plan to bring shipbuilding back to the United States. I didn't know it was the Bay Area. I mean, most of the places where they built ships have, been converted into other things. So I'm not sure where they would start and then where you find the people, train the people to do that. It would certainly be nice to build the ships in America, but I think that's a huge project. So I'm not sure it would be in the Bay Area, especially when you get into the cost of living and all to pay. I have a feeling it'd be more in places like Texas and the Gulf Coast and like that. But and maybe Mississippi and Alabama where there are shipyards and expanding those. That'd be more likely, I would think, than the Bay Area.
Are there any other questions? It's quiet out there. I don't have any questions. A lot of excellent presentation. Thank you for all the information on your contributions to California and the American business culture. Is there a comprehensive book that somebody could buy?
Yes, there's I think at least two biographies of Henry J. Kaiser, and that really, when I first started reading about him or learning about him, it was one of those. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. If you just do Henry Kaiser, in your library or on Amazon, I don't know if they're still in print. Excuse me, they're definitely at libraries. Um, but yeah, I mean, what I kind of gave you was a snapshot of this man, and over a 10 to 15 year period, and talk at all about his road building and levees and things like that pre this era, and then cars. He bought Willis company after the war, which made Jeeps. So he owned Jeep for quite a while. He built Kaiser Fraser cars post-war. Um, he was the first one. The Hughes, the Spruce Goose, that was a Kaiser idea. He had an idea of these large transport planes that wouldn't be subject to submarine attack, and took it to the government. And the what became the Spruce Goose, or the Hughes, whatever it is, it was originally the KH-1. The Kaiser Hughes 1 was going to be this massive cargo plane. Henry Kaiser, hurry up, Henry, and real slow Howard Hughes did not get along. Kaiser got frustrated with Hughes and pulled out, and then Howard Hughes went and built the one model that's sort of famous as the Spruce Goose. So he had lots of ideas and other things that he did. He built houses, thousands of homes in Southern California with Fritz Burns. They had a factory. I mean, that same sort of idea of mass production that he used on ships, they did it with houses. They cut the lumber in Oregon, pre-cut it. By the time it arrived at their factory in Westchester in Los Angeles, pieces of it were already ready to put together. The plumbing trees were put together, and they trucked them out to these housing developments around Los Angeles. Panorama City was the first planned community. That's a Fritz Kaiser and Fritz Burns and Henry Kaiser thing. So he did all kinds of things. They made appliances, and I mean, he's a fascinating guy. He really is. So yes, you would be interested in reading much more about him than I covered. I just tried to do the local angle right here.
That was good. So here's a question: the history of the old cement plant. What's left, and can it be preserved?
Well, I don't know. I could be. I mean, they're huge buildings. They're, you know, surprisingly, I went into one of the supervisor, Joe Simidian, who recently was termed out, but it was his district. He worked for 10 years on getting that plant closed down and getting Hanson, the current owner, to start coming up with a plan of what they're going to do with it. Like I said, there's nothing in there that preserves the history of it. Sadly, I mean, it would be nice that it was a historic district. I'm not sure that you want to save a lot of those buildings. Surprisingly, in their mitigation plan, it's not real dirty. I mean, the water is pretty clean. There's not like huge, super fun things to clean up out there. Um, but the buildings are, I don't know that you could ever make them accessible to people visiting for the historic, because they could be dangerous. They probably aren't anywhere near ADA and all the other issues that you get into. But that doesn't mean that you can't do something to preserve it. I sort of compare it to the Almaden Quicksilver Park, where they preserved as best they could this old mining equipment in South San Jose for quicksilver or mercury. I'd say Permanente was a far more important contribution to our history than the Almaden mines. Um, but that's something that I think you're going to have to wait and see. But yeah, there at least should be something out there, footprints of what things were there, and some sort of display. But I don't think you want to really save those huge buildings. It's a massive, massive place if you've ever been out there. You really can't describe it. And it's very weird because we live in a valley that's so tuned to making things very, very tiny. And you drive out there and turn a corner, and here's this massive machinery and conveyor belts and things like that.
Here's another question. You said Henry's son took over at one point. How did that go?
Well, a lot of the companies, they just some of them didn't keep up with the times, and they were either closed down or sold off and don't have their names anymore. Um, so they just really, he didn't have any great succession plan of keeping things together. I don't know why. Um, like I said, there are some Kaiser named entities. Kaiser Engineering was a group. I think they still exist. It's interesting. The Kaiser Engineering, so the Manned Space Center, Houston, in Houston, the mission control for the Manned Space Center. So the Houston, we got a problem place. That was designed by Kaiser Engineering. All those monitors and all those things that the NASA engineers worked at was designed by Kaiser Engineering and built by Philco in Palo Alto, and then set up in Houston. So they did a lot of things, but I think Kaiser Engineering still exists. I'm not sure who owns them, but why it wasn't kept together, I don't know, but it just didn't. I think a lot of it was just Henry's personality was a lot of what held that company together and just doing all these different things.
Here's another question. Sausalito had a very interesting display at the Bay Model. Is it still there?
You know, I've never actually, as interesting as I am in history, I've never been to the Bay Model, the Corps of Engineers has, but that's in the area where Marin Ships was. And Marin City, that housing was housing for shipyard workers, and it's remained as a community within Marin County. I don't know if the display is still there. Hopefully it is. It's part of that history of that area.
Okay. Here's a question, sort of. I recently was asked to research the quarry for a woman who was part of the Granite Rock Company. Found information on the El Dorado sugar refinery and horse and wagon transport of limestone. Also saw a few lines about gold miners. Quarrying limestone up there. How is limestone used in refining gold?
I didn't know that it was. I mean, the research, I'm not a geologist um, or anything. I mean, as you can see from those old articles and from the writings that I found, the original use of the limestone, I think, well, Granite bought it because they were going to use it for roads.
Yeah.
Whether they ever did, I don't know. But it was used to process beet sugar. Um, I didn't know that it was used for gold. That's what mercury was mined for in South San Jose, was for gold, separating gold from the ore. I didn't know limestone was, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And then it's used, as for cement.
Okay. Here's another question. Did Kaiser have children?
Yes, he had two sons, Edgar Kaiser and Henry J. Kaiser Jr. They both worked with him. I think Edgar was the older one. One of them had MS, so Kaiser put money into MS research very early on before it was it was obviously around, but didn't have much attention paid to it. They did some other businesses. One of them owned the Denver Broncos for a while early on and things like that. And there are grandchildren, I believe, great grandchildren, but none of them were like the old man.
Yeah. I don't see any more questions, but it was certainly a very interesting presentation. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned before, we recorded this presentation and we will post it on our website. So not today, not tomorrow, but within a week or so, please check our website, www.saratogahistory.com, and you can see the presentation again. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you.